And when you were British number one, what was it like having Andy Murray coming up and sort of snapping at your heels? How did you feel about that? And what's your sort of feeling as we're looking on a summer which might see him retire?
Yeah. So look, I didn't really classify Andy as a rival because I think he's 12 years younger than me, and he came onto the tour. We played each other on several occasions, and he beat me, a few times. I beat him once, and so I felt like I was much more of a mentor to him. Someone like Greg Rosetsky was, he was much more of a rival, and he came from Canada when I was 20, 21 or whatever, and that was much more of a rivalry. And I'm sure Greg and I helped each other because we pushed each other with that competitive element. Whereas Andy was someone I'd known through Davis Cup and him coming on the scene from when he was, I don't know, 14 or 15. So it's been incredible to watch his journey and what he's been able to achieve with 3 Grand Slams, winning Wimbledon, obviously on 2 occasions, winning gold twice in the singles in London and Rio, and then finishing the year world number one. It's an incredible achievement, and in the area that we've just discussed up against Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, which for me is the strongest era in the sport's history. And again, I think that's indicated by the numbers. Federer, Nadal, Djokovic have won 66 Grand Slams between them. You think about, Borg and McEnroe. I think Borg won 11, McEnroe won 7. Yeah, that's 18. Agassi and Sampras. Sampras won 14. I think Agassi won 8 or 9. That's 22. I mean, they have just been the most incredibly dominant figures. And Murray was still able to achieve what he did. So, no, it's been amazing to watch, and look, whenever he does decide to stop, if it is at Wimbledon, I just hope that he, can enjoy it and get the send off that he deserves. Because I think when you start out in sport, certainly in tennis, it's very obvious. It's in front of you. We have a ranking system in the men's that goes down to about 2,000. So, if you get on the ladder and you're ranked 1,000, you want to be 500. And if you're 500, you want to be 200. And, you're getting into different tournaments. There are different opportunities. But actually, when you get to the other end of your career and you're thinking about retirement, how do you stop? Do you finish a year? Do you finish at an event? Do you win an event and stop? It's very difficult to plan. So I hope Andy does, get the send off he deserves.
Yeah, Matt Dickinson, I interviewed him for the pod actually recently, and he wrote this wonderful article which was who the fuck, excuse my French, are we to tell Andy Murray when to retire? And it was a wonderful article, because what it really got across is that if he didn't still love it, he wouldn't do it, because he doesn't need to do it. So, and it was a really good piece, which sort of which really got to the heart of that very subject, and it really resonated. And I thought, well, that's absolutely true. I think people assume that you should give something up because you may not be achieving what you always were achieving as a sports person. But there's another side to that, isn't there? What's it like retiring? What is it like to go through that process of having been the British number one, playing at Wimbledon, all the focus on for that 2 weeks of the year, as well as, just being used to the routine of a 52-week-a-year calendar, which is kind of what you guys have.
You just reminded me of one other point that I was going to make, and then I forgot. It is interesting, and it's part of it's interesting that this is part of our psyche on the island that we live on, not the Isle of Wight, but, kind of the UK, because you never hear Federer talked about as the Swiss number one. You never hear Nadal spoken about as the Spanish number one, but we are always related to the British number one. And it's a bit bizarre. And I think it's, in a global sport, it's sort of something that, we should kind of get away from. I'd much rather be British number 2 and 12 in the world than British number 1 and 112 in the world. but there's always been that fascination. So for me, in 2007, I was struggling a little bit with injuries. I was just coming up to my 33rd birthday. My wife and I had 2 daughters. She was pregnant with our 3rd daughter. We didn't know that at the time. But I started off in America after Wimbledon. I was playing in Washington, and I played John Isner in the first round. And John was, 6'10" still then, just come out of college, and was coming onto the pro scene, serving absolute rockets everywhere. And I played him in the night match, first round in Washington, which was a tournament I'd won a few years earlier. And I ended up losing 7-6 in the third, very close match where he served probably 35 aces in 3 sets. And I went back to the hotel with my coach, Paul Annacone, who's probably my best friend from tennis, who coached Sampras, coached myself, then went on to coach Federer. He was top 20 in the world himself, so a very good player. And we just sort of critiquing the match. And I sort of said, after a couple of beers, I said, for the first time ever, I think this might become my job rather than my hobby. And he said to me, just very matter-of-factly, he said, well, if you're not enjoying it, don't do it. And I sort of looked at him and said, what, retire? And he said, well, if you're not enjoying it, why would you do it? And I thought, that makes sense. And then I looked at my schedule, and I had 2 Masters 1000s, one in Canada, one in Cincinnati. I then had the US Open, which is obviously a Grand Slam, one of the cornerstones of our sport. And then I had a Davis Cup match for Great Britain representing my country, which very conveniently was going to be played at Wimbledon on grass, on court 1 at the end of September. And I looked at my schedule. So we're probably right at the beginning of August. And all of a sudden, there was 7 weeks mapped out with 1, 2, 3, 4 events. And I thought, and then my wife's due date was sort of middle of September. I just looked at it and I thought, that is it. That's absolutely perfect. I'm going to retire. And suddenly it was like I could see the finish line. I played very well in those tournaments, got to the Davis Cup, and actually the team was Andy and Jamie Murray, myself. And on the Friday, Andy and I played singles. He won his match, I won my match. And then on Saturday, I played doubles with Jamie, and we won in 4 sets. It was a tight match. I hit a winner on match point to win the tie, and that was it. And I just felt so happy that I got this opportunity to play at Wimbledon in front of a British crowd. And I always remember, so we had a pretty big night in London, and then on Sunday there were dead rubbers because the tie was over. It's 3-love. So I didn't have to play those matches, which was a good thing because I was feeling pretty ropey the next morning. But then I went home to where we live now, south of Oxford, and our daughters at that age were, I think, 5 and 3. And so on the Monday morning, I said to my wife, well, I'll take Rosie and Liv to nursery, drop them off, and then came back home. And we've always had black Labradors. We've got 2 black labs, had 2 black labs at the time. And I said, I'm going to take them for a walk, and, on a long walk, just to sort of think, what now? And I remember when I set off on this walk, I felt like the world had been lifted off my shoulders. However, if you'd have said to me the week before, do you feel any external pressure or expectation? I would have said none. I play for myself. I'm out there competing for myself. I absolutely love what I do. And it just made me reflect that in actual fact, that was my environment. I didn't know any differently. But all of a sudden, there was a newfound freedom. And, with my wife, then 3 young daughters, lots of other interests, whether it's, golf, whether it was getting involved in at Wimbledon on the tournament board. I wanted to, travel and explore places, on holiday without tennis rackets. I was so excited about the opportunity. It was almost like the start of a new life. And I feel very fortunate, very grateful that I had that. And so I can totally understand how sportsmen and women, when they step away from something that has consumed them potentially for their whole life, and they don't have something to fill that void, I think that can be can imagine that can be very, very challenging.
And I know you've recently lost your dad, which is really sad, and I'm very sorry. Does it sort of
Thank you.
the
Thank you.
fact that he was able to see you play on centre court, not once, not twice, but many times, and him being such a keen admirer of the game anyway, and a keen sportsman, what do you think that meant to him, and what did it mean to you to be able to do that for him? Because your parents, particularly your dad, well loved around SW19. I mean, that must have been a great thing for him to see you realise your dreams there.
I think so. Look, I've had plenty of conversations with my parents, and they were both members. My mum's still a member at Wimbledon. My dad was a member at Wimbledon. So, hugely passionate about the club and the championships, and obviously supporting me. And now, as a parent, my daughters don't play tennis, but I'm obviously, very aware of tennis parents and the challenges that go with that. And it certainly made me reflect enormously on, what incredible parents I had, but also what incredible tennis parents I had and have. And so they were always so supportive, but they never interfered. And, I perhaps didn't realize that quite so much at the time, but now, certainly as I've got older, I've reflected on, the events that they came to the US Open a couple of times. They came to Australia a couple of times. How much they enjoyed it, and how many friendships they made in and around tennis. I felt incredibly fortunate. And so, my dad had been ill for the last 5 or 6 years with a form of blood cancer, but he was very much able to live with that and manage that. And so when he passed away, 4 or 5 weeks ago, it certainly didn't come as a surprise, and he was at home and completely with it mentally. My mum, had cared for him so well. It really gave us the opportunity to have a lot of these conversations about everything. And so that's where, we felt so fortunate that we were, able to communicate and so, yeah, I mean, it makes you reflect. But, when I look back at, Wimbledon, and again, a very sad story, Mike Dixon, who I'm sure you knew, who was the Daily Mail lead tennis correspondent. My sister-in-law is godparent to one of their children, and he's someone that I met when I was 16, and his wife, Lucy, is a very good friend. Mike sadly passed away in January in Australia, working on the Australian Open, and he actually made a comment about my dad a long time ago at Wimbledon, and it was quite amusing, but it was very well written. He said that my dad, watching in the player box on centre court, was basically as nervous as anyone could be, but he knew there were cameras on him, and he was never going to react too much, and he was never going to be shouting and screaming. He was always there, well dressed in a jacket and tie. And my dad and Mike Dixon, he sort of phrased it that my dad's was one of the great British performances of the fortnight, because there weren't really many other sort of good British performances on the court. So my dad sitting there so stoically in the player box went down as one of the great British performances, and my dad always laughed at that, and I think quite enjoyed that. So my dad's sadly missed but not forgotten.
Yeah, he knew exactly what was required given the moment, no doubt.
Yeah,
Tim,
definitely.
why do you think your girls don't play? I have this debate with Ben a lot, because a lot of our sailing team kids aren't sailors. They're not really interested. I think they feel like it consumes their life in so many other ways. They don't feel the need to necessarily do it. I mean, why do you think that's the case with your girls?
Yeah, I think a couple of reasons. I think really, if you're going to play, if you're looking to go down the performance pathway as a young female player, you have to specialize very young. I think also as well, because a lot of the female players mature earlier than the boys. Everything that goes around the competition physically and emotionally. I think it's I think it's hard. And look, I loved it. I would do it all again tomorrow. But I think there's also quite a large part of me that feels they've probably got the wrong surname in this country to play tennis. I just think there would be, whether they liked it or not, there would be, a lot of pressure and expectation
Scrutiny
that goes with that. So yeah, and so look, they all enjoy the game. They all play and they played at school. My eldest she's at Exeter University. She's just finished her second year. When she started there 2 years ago, she did join the local tennis club using my wife's maiden name, which I thought was quite clever. So look, they love the game, they follow the game, they watch the pro game, which is perfect. But I think there's quite a large part of me that's quite happy that they didn't want to follow in my footsteps.
And I guess pressure does come, doesn't it, in all sorts of forms. What do you think the future holds for Emma Raducanu? I have to ask you because you've been sort of close to this story as it's evolved. And what do you think's next for her? There's so much expectation on her shoulders. She's already won a slam, which is pretty amazing. But everyone is expecting, there to be multiple versions of that, and immediately. So what does she do next? What's her next play?
She's doing brilliantly. Her journey has been completely back to front. She was sitting her A-levels. It was on the back of COVID. She hadn't, been doing any sort of training, practicing or kind of fitness work. And she made fourth round at Wimbledon. She went to America. And you have to, to put it into context, since the Open era in tennis, since 1968, no one in the men's or the women's game has ever qualified and made the final of a Grand Slam. So all the greats of the game. So going back to Borg and McEnroe and Evert and Navratilova and Sampras and Agassi and Nadal and Serena Williams, Venus Williams, no one's ever qualified and made the final of a Grand Slam. She qualified and won the US Open. So, it's absolutely incredible. So she's had this amazing success, but she hasn't then got the physical resilience to deal with playing at the highest level. And so, it's well documented. She had, some unfortunate and slightly unlucky injuries. And so to step away, she had 3 surgeries. She had 2 on her wrists, 1 on each wrist and an ankle operation. For me, I think that was a blessing in disguise. It's given her the opportunity to step away, to really start building the physical resilience. And, she's back on the court now. She played well on the clay in the events that she played. She beat some very good players. She made semis in Nottingham last week. So I have no doubts because of, how gifted she is. She's a phenomenal tennis player. She's a great athlete who's building up her strength and conditioning and therefore the physical resilience so she can compete and not get injured. And mentally, having spent a bit of time around her when she won the US Open, I mean, her fortitude, her mindset, her ability just to, focus on what she was doing in an environment that she had no experience was absolutely incredible. So, this will fall on deaf ears, but we just have to be patient. The media unfortunately want the results yesterday. So, but I've got no doubts that she will be, working her way back through the rankings. I'm sure, she's got every opportunity of being in the top 100 by the end of this year. And then you're back playing the main tour and the slams. So I think she's brilliant and, don't have any doubts really.
Oh, that's really good to hear. So on to predictions for this year's Wimbledon. Where do we think it's heading? Or wouldn't it be a fairy tale story if Andy and Jamie Murray pairing up in the doubles end up taking the title?
Yeah. That would be very special. Yeah, I'd pay good money to see that. Look, on the men's side, I think on both the men's and the women's, it's the most open tournament in the last 20 or 25 years. And Federer's retired, Nadal's not playing. I'd be surprised if Djokovic can come back from knee surgery that quickly. So, the field is opened up, and I think led by Alcaraz and Sinner. Alcaraz is defending champion. Sinner made semis on grass last year, so he's world number one, playing brilliant tennis. So I wouldn't be surprised if I'd probably say my favourite is Alcaraz because of just how well he plays on every surface. His athletic ability, his movement is incredible. But there's plenty of players out there looking to knock him off his perch. And likewise on the women's, I think Swiatek's clear world number one, but I don't think she has the experience and perhaps a slight trepidation playing on grass because she's so good on clay and hard, and the movement is different on grass. So I think she's got to learn to adapt her game. Sabalenka and Rybakina are just two such explosive hitters. Rybakina has won Wimbledon before. Coco Gauff, amazing to think that this is probably her fifth Wimbledon and she's only 20. She got a wild card into qualifying and made fourth round when she was 15. She beat Venus Williams. What she's doing for the game globally is massive. So I'm so, weather permitting, I'm so excited, about the championships this year because it's going to be brilliant.
Well, I'm most looking forward to sitting next to you again at that Rolex dinner with Gary Player to our left or right.
Your favourite administrator.
Absolutely, forever and always. Tim, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Great to talk to you, Georgie. Thanks for having me.
Join us for the Performance People podcast every week for the highs, lows, lessons and stories from people like this lot. Michael Johnson.
Some days what I would see is a person who is a shell of what I used to be.
Eddie Hearn.
We don't operate in a business that's dangerous, but we just operate in one where you've got to sleep with one eye open.
Mo Farah.
It couldn't get any harder than what I've gone through, and at that point I just went for it.
Paula Radcliffe.
You can only control yourself.
Susie Wolf.
And Toto did once liken me to a donkey.
Every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.